The battlefields for this game are Fortified Position for Chris, who's playing Sett, the boss, and Aspirant's Climb for Jameson, who's playing Lee Sin, Blind Monk, using Chris's deck list that he used in Max's 32-man tournament. In an effort to reinvent the alphabet, Chris will draw for turn, and then he'll channel 2. He'll exhaust both of those runes to play a Treferian Glory Seeker into his base exhausted, and then he'll pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson, with a much firmer grasp on what he learned in kindergarten, will channel 2, and then he'll draw for turn. But with a less firm grasp on how to play Riftbound, he'll remember that he needs to channel a third rune because he went second. He'll exhaust 2 to play a Stalwart Poro into his base exhausted, and then he'll pass the turn. Chris will craw for turn, and then he'll Daniel 2. Why ready the cards when you're just going to exhaust them to move anyways? So Chris will move his Trifarian Glory Seeker into Fortified Position to score his first point. He will follow that up by exhausting 3 runes to play an Arena Bar, and then use the Arena Bar to buff his Glory Seeker. And, with nothing else to do, he'll pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson will channel 2, and then he'll draw for turn. Jameson will get started by exhausting 5 runes and recycling 2 body runes to play a Carnivorous Snapvine into his base exhausted. The Snapvine and the Glory Seeker will deal damage to each other equal to their mights. Usually the Glory Seeker will die, but Chris will use Sett's legend ability to spin the buff and recycle a rune to recall the Glory Seeker instead. Too impatient to let Chris finish recycling, Jameson will move his Stalwart Poro into Fortified Position and score his first point. Then he'll pass the turn to Chris. Chris will draw for turn, then he'll channel 2 and awaken his runes. He will get started by moving his Treferian Glory Seeker into Aspirant's Climb to score a point, then he will use Arena Bar to buff the Glory Seeker. He will follow that up by exhausting 2 runes and playing a Cytheria into Aspirant's Climb. Finally, he will exhaust 2 runes to play a Treferian Glory Seeker into Aspirant's Climb. This will trigger the Glory Seeker's Legion ability, buffing it, and because he played another unit, Cytheria will trigger, buffing herself. And with nothing else to do, he'll pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson will score a point for holding Fortified Position, then he will channel 2 and draw for turn. He will get started by exhausting 2 runes to play Pit Rookie into his base exhausted, using the Pit Rookie's ability to buff his Stalwart Poro. He will follow that up by exhausting 1 rune to use his Lee Sin's legend ability to buff the Carnivorous Snapvine. And with nothing else to do, he'll pass the turn to Chris. Chris will score a point for holding Aspirant's Climb, then he will draw for turn and channel 2. He will get started by recalling all of the units at Aspirant's Climb that he never readied. He will then exhaust 4 runes and recycle an Order rune to play his chosen champion, Sett Kingpin, into his base exhausted. Finally, he'll use Arena Bar to buff his Sett Kingpin, and with nothing else to do, he'll pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson will score a point for holding Fortified Position, then he'll channel 2 and draw for turn. He will get started by recalling the Stalwart Poro to his base, then he'll move the Pit Rookie to Aspirant's Climb to score another point. Next, he'll move his Carnivorous Snapvine into Fortified Position, but because he already scored this location, he will not score again. He will follow this up by exhausting 5 runes and recycle a Calm rune to play his chosen champion, Lee Sin Ascetic, into his base exhausted. And finally, he will recycle a rune to hide a card at Fortified Position, and then, with nothing else to do, he'll pass the turn to Chris. Chris will draw for turn, practice his hand shuffling a little bit, and then he'll channel 2. He will get started by exhausting 4 runes to play a Fiora into his base exhausted, and then he will follow that up by using his Arena Bar to buff the Fiora. This will make the Fiora mighty, so she will now have Deflect, Ganking, and Shield. Next, he will exhaust 3 runes to play a First Mate into his base exhausted. The First Mate's effect will ready the Fiora. Then, he will move his Fiora into Aspirant's Climb to start a showdown with Jameson's Pit Rookie. Showing just how much of a rookie it is, the Pit Rookie will die without putting up much of a fight. Chris will conquer Aspirant's Climb and score another point. Not wanting to lose most of his units trying to take Fortified Position from the Snapvine, he will pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson will score a point from holding Fortified Position, then he will channel 2 and draw for turn. He will get started by exhausting 1 rune and recycling a Calm rune to play Charm on Chris's Sett. This will move the Sett into Fortified Position to fight the Snapvine. The Sett will die, but Chris will use his Legend's Replacement effect to spin the buff and recycle a rune to recall the Sett to base instead. After that, Jameson will exhaust 4 runes and recycle a body rune to play a Kiana into his base exhausted. Then, he will move his Stalwart Poro to fortify his position at Fortified Position. He will follow that up by using his Lee Sin Ascetic's ability to buff itself. Then, wanting to leave up 2 runes for combat tricks, he'll pass the turn to Chris. Chris will score a point for holding Aspirant's Climb. He will draw for turn and channel 2. After exactly 53 seconds of deliberation, Chris decides to recall his Fiora back to base. Next, he'll exhaust 3 runes to play a Kraken Hunter into his base exhausted, but he will use its effect to spin buffs instead of recycling runes for power. He will follow that up by exhausting his Arena Bar to buff his Kraken Hunter, but still not confident about his abilities to take fortified position, he will pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson will score a point for holding fortified position, then he will channel 2 and draw for turn. He will get started by moving his Kiana into Aspirin's Climb to score another point. This will trigger Kiana's ability and Jameson will choose to draw a card. He will get started by exhausting one rune and recycling a Calm rune to play Charm, targeting the Sett Kingpin, moving it into fortified position. Jameson chooses to use fortified position to give Stalwart Poro shield 2, so it'll go to 7 might, and the Sett can kill neither unit, so the Sett will die, and because it does not have a buff, it will actually die this time. Next, he will exhaust 3 runes to play a first mate into his base exhausted. This will ready the Kiana, and he will retreat the Kiana back to his base. Playing it slow and steady, he will exhaust his Lee Sin Ascetic to buff itself, then he will exhaust 1 rune to use his Lee Sin's Legend ability to buff it again. And with nothing else to do, he'll pass the turn to Chris. Chris will draw for turn, and then he'll channel 2. Chris will exhaust 5 runes and recycle 2 body runes to play a Carnivorous Snapvine into his base, targeting the Stalwart Poro. These units will deal their might to each other, and the Poro will die. Chris will then move his Kraken Hunter, Fiora, and Trifarian Glory Seeker into fortified position for a showdown with Jameson's Carnivorous Snapvine, because the absolute maximum might Jameson could produce would be 14 here. Fortified position will give Jameson Snapvine Shield 2, and Jameson will use the block that he has hidden at fortified position to give the Snapvine Shield 3 on top of that. In addition to block, Jameson will exhaust 2 runes to use a Discipline to buff his Snapvine another 2 might and draw a card. With the buff, Shield 5, and Discipline, the Snapvine will go to 14 might, killing all of Chris's units at fortified position, but it will die in return. Chris will also spin the buff and recycle a rune to use his Sett's Legend ability to save the Kraken Hunter and recall it to base instead of letting it die. He will then use Arena Bar to rebuff the Kraken Hunter. Next, he will move Cythria into Aspirin's Climb to score a point, and then he will move the Glory Seeker into fortified position to score another point. In most games, this would force Jameson to clear both locations so that Chris can't score his 8th point when he holds, but because Aspirin's Climb is out, they are playing to 9 instead. Chris will then move his first mate into fortified position. Next, he will exhaust a rune and recycle 1 to play Showstopper to move his Snapvine into fortified position and buff it, and then he'll pass the turn to Jameson. Jameson will channel 2, and then he'll draw for turn. He will get started by moving his Lee Sin, Kiana, and first mate into Aspirin's Climb for a showdown with Chris's Cythria. Cythria will head back to Cloudfield, and Jameson will score his 8th point, but remember, they're going to 9 because of Aspirin's Climb. Chris will recycle a rune and spin the buff on Cythria to retreat her to base instead of letting her die. Jameson will follow that up by exhausting 2 runes to play Stalwart Poro at Aspirin's Climb. Then he will exhaust 2 more runes to play Pit Rookie at Aspirin's Climb, using its effect to buff Kiana. And with a fortress built at Aspirin's Climb, he will now pass the turn to Chris, attempting to hold for his 9th point on his next turn. Chris will score his 8th point for holding fortified position, then he will draw for turn and channel 2. He will get started by moving his units from fortified position back to base. Then he will make a half-hearted show of having his Kraken Hunter kill a couple of Jameson's units at Aspirin's Climb. He will then recycle 1 and spin the buff on Kraken Hunter to recall it to his base instead of letting it die. But, knowing that there's no way he's going to be able to kill all of Jameson's units at Aspirin's Climb, he will play 2 units into fortified position and then pass the turn to Jameson, and Jameson will win by holding and scoring his 9th point. That's all for now. Hope you enjoyed.